You know, when no one's watching, you can get away with anything. Gotcha. What's up, everyone? Welcome to my channel. My name is Jasmine on My Keen Imagination, where not only do we relax, relate, and release, we're reading, recapping, reviewing, and ranting. Because one thing about me, I enjoy ranting about your favorite characters and authors. Today, I am going to be talking about When No One's Watching, or should I say, How to Get Away with Murder. Shout out to Annalise Keating, aka Viola Davis. Yes, one thing for sure and two things for certain, this book gave the legitimate rule book on how to get away with murder, but it only applies if you're white. So let's get into it. The setting for When No One's Watching is in Brooklyn, New York. Shout out to New York. And the time is around, I want to say, over the course of 7 days, and is leading up to, I believe it's Labor Day. If it's not Labor Day, then it is some occasion with a block party. But I believe that it was the Labor Day parade that was approaching. The pacing was slow. I'm talking, whoo! I think the pacing was slow because in the first legitimate half of the book, Alyssa really explored like a lot of details that I think will look so great on film, because you need these details in order for the things to make sense. So I mean, I didn't mind it. It just took a little bit longer for me to get through it than I would have liked, especially if it's a thriller and I'm expecting like bam, 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 boom. Like I'm expecting that when I think of thriller and getting antsy. And I didn't really get that in the beginning half, or the beginning quarter of the book. It was a lot of like character development. It was a lot of like, just exploration of building up those blocks of what you later explored and what made sense. I don't know if that just made sense what I said, but I'm gonna get into it a little bit without truly spoiling it. And if it is a spoiler, I'll put an alert. One of the things that she explored was a lot of historical fiction, and I think it was important to do that because the book was really centered around gentrification. Right? Think Get Out, the movie featuring like the Tuskegee experiment. But that historical fiction component was necessary because when you're exploring gentrification, you're building up like this rich history of what existed prior. So I can speak on this because I'm from New York and we're to this day experiencing the gentrification, which was a really timely piece, I would say. Main character Sydney, she's basically talking about like what her neighborhood looked like. Her neighborhood was filled with a lot of Black people across the diaspora. In this neighborhood, you have Black owned businesses, you have Black owned buildings and people who were living in these homes, living in these brownstones, and you know, you grew up. And Sydney's like 20 something years old in this book, so she's lived there her entire life. I think she had a brief moment when she was married, so she was living with her then husband, and then she recently moved back home because her mom is ill. So in this historical fiction, which ties into, I can also say, like my life, my mom, she grew up in Brooklyn, and you know, areas like Bed-Stuy and everything. My mom can go in Brooklyn and know exactly where she is and how to get from point A to point B with like the back of her head, right? Even when I'm traveling through Brooklyn with her, she's like looking at her old neighborhoods and everything and seeing how different it is. And you're kind of seeing that in real time within this book with Sydney, and how like she's noticing like businesses are closing down or shutting down, and people who lived in these neighborhoods all their life and plan to live there for the rest of their lives are like disappearing or leaving. And one day she's watching from the creeps of her window, and you know, there's these people, they're showing different brownstones, and they're kind of like giving like this faux fiction of like Brooklyn, and you know, how you gonna tell a story about where I'm from, basically. And Sydney's like, that's not what happened, that's not who lived there, and, like she's going rah 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 to the people. There's a lot of characters we also meet, and I think this is where it also became confusing to me, because usually, or generally speaking, I'm fine with meeting a lot of people, but I think that the way that it was introduced, it was just a bunch of names, and I didn't know who they were, what they're doing, but it was a purpose for that, right? Because if we're talking about the situation where people that Sydney knew, and I'm in Sydney's world, I have to imagine like she knows and she recognizes everybody on this block and in this neighborhood. So basically, at one point we were talking to everybody. We were block association meeting or something, and you had like, I'm just naming random people: Mr. Johnson and Mr. James and Miss Betty and Miss White and Miss Annie. You had everybody, but it's just significant to kind of keep you in mind where this is where Sydney grew up. This is, her block and her people, and she recognizes they've known her since she was young. So when talking about characters, the first person I'm going to kind of introduce a little bit is Sydney Green. She's the main character of this book, and we meet her. She's kind of like the narrating voice alongside the other person I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But when it comes to Sydney, it was interesting because while we're meeting these new characters or these other supporting characters for her, you see how Sydney shows up and how she is in relation to these other people. So when Sydney's talking to her best friend, you see that dynamic. When Sydney's talking to that new neighbor, you see that dynamic and how Sydney shows up in that. You see Sydney's dynamic with her mother. You see that with her and the neighbors and how she shows up. One thing's for sure, she's very affirming and she advocates majorly for her community, which is why she is important to this book. The other thing about this book is from two viewpoints. We have Sydney's viewpoint and we have Theo. I have a lot to say about Theo. Let's just start there. But I don't know if I have the time to really say it, but I do have to say this. Because if you pick up that book, or if you read this book, I'm gonna say this. And I'm also gonna say this. Dirty fingernails. Yuck. If you've read this book, or if you are thinking about reading this book, when you get to this point where I'm talking about dirty fingernails and how I've had, my nose was already turned up when we were talking about him. But when I tell you my nose is real. So from Theo's viewpoint, he's kind of showing up as one of the gentrifiers, right? Alyssa did an interesting scope of exploring this person's viewpoint of wow, I just showed up here and I didn't know that me moving here was a big deal. That's the voice that Theo had. I'm for the people, you can count on me. I love us for real. It was really that for me. Theo enters this neighborhood innocently. I'm here, I'm moving with my girlfriend or whatever that person was to him. And I like it here, I guess. And I'm sorry that my presence upsets you, but I want to help. I want to join the community stuff and be a part of the functions. It was giving very much, you gotta watch. Of course, Sydney and Theo are going to meet, right? Because Sydney is watching her neighborhood change. She's watching the people coming in droves to doing this open house thing for the brownstones in the neighborhood. And it's ain't no brownstones for sale over here. Ain't no houses for sale over here. How y'all having open houses and ain't nobody moving? So Theo, he moves in basically across the street from Sydney, and he's watching her and he's enamored with her because she's such a cool looking black girl. When we got to the thriller, I would say the thrill was definitely up. Once the pacing lifted and things were moving, I did feel the intensity rising. I felt those things the hair on the back of my neck. She did a really nice job on those details, and the paranoia was coming out. I had goosebumps. I would often say out loud what the hell is going on? What's happening? It was a fun ride. And child, I think that's why I'm upset, because I had a very specific way of how this was going to play out. And to be honest, that way is still going to be how it played out in my head. They can do whatever they want to do in that book. But so some of the themes, I think I've mentioned it, but of course, gentrification. Another one was mental health, and how it's, it can be ignored for certain communities and how it can be played upon. in certain communities. Relying on people in community was another big theme. One of the things that Alyssa Cole did a really nice job with was just kind of like capturing the essence of this community and this neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it speaks volumes about this community of people who look out for one another. Lastly, how did I feel when I got to the end? When I got to the end, I was a bit indifferent. And I think that it was so much jammed-packed thrill, right? And like a good chunk of this book, even when it got to the end, that when it ended in the way that it did, it kind of just like I was holding my breath the entire time. And when we finally got to like that part, I was kind of like it wasn't like a whew, it was kind of like a I guess I can breathe. And I felt like some things were kind of left unsaid, and you were left to kind of piece it together yourself. There were just some things that are mentioned, like some of those, I don't know if they were just actually delusions or if they were actually things that was happening. You're kind of like just forced to kind of put together yourself. So, I don't know. The tone was clear to me. I was setting up shopping communities with plans, unbeknownst to us. And honestly, there's no way to stop this unless we all wake up at the same time. It was very much like wake up or get out. It spoke a lot about these doorbells, right? Those Ring doorbells. Everybody who moved into the block and basically gentrified, they had a Ring doorbell. So like you were literally able to always watch. And it's like, it goes back to like that. When no one's watching, you're always watching, essentially. That's my review of When No One's Watching. This book stressed me out. It stressed me out, but I don't know if it stressed me out that much. Because it's ending the way that I played it out ending. Alyssa, let's be for real. No, because now I'm mad. Alyssa, let's be for real right now. Let's talk about Theo. And let's talk about Sydney. Did we have to do that? You know what that is. This is going to be a mini spoiler. Did we have to explore romance with them? Like, did we have to jump into that trope of I'm the activist for my community and, you know, people know my name, and the how can I help? My name is Theo and I want to help you. I want to make this right. You want to make it right? Move off my block. That's how you make it right. Pack up your things and get to stepping. Because, like, let's be honest. What other way are we going to make this right? You're part of the problem. But you see, Alyssa, you try to confuse me. You try to confuse me a little bit because you said, I'm going to throw in some attraction. I'm going to throw in Sydney, who is recently divorced, got a lot of things going on. Her mama's ill. And I'm going to throw in this one. I'm going to throw him in there because he got his own mess going on. He living with a perhaps girlfriend, maybe not. No, we just living together. I ain't got no other place to go. She been supporting me. Her family rich. So it's like, I'm just going to kick it with her. We're going to throw him in there because now he's lacking love and she's lacking love. And let's go ahead and put them together. What can we do with that? No, Alyssa. What can I do with that? The problem is part of him. But you see, you try to confuse my good sis. You try to confuse her. I want justice for Sydney. I didn't want Lady and the Tramp for her. I wanted much more for my good sis. And instead, you gave me dirty fingernails. I think I'm done. You see, you confuse all the other readers. You ain't confuse me, babe. You didn't confuse me because I picked up what you was putting down. You might have everybody else confused, but you don't got me confused. Nope, you don't. Not at all. Period. Now I'm done.